Welcome to the All Sorts podcast. We're a space where, curiosity leads the way and conversations hopefully build some understanding.
Right, like an intellectual playground.
Exactly. A place to explore all sorts of ideas, really. Ancient history, cutting-edge science, you name it.
And we've built up quite a library of past explorations already.
We have. So, dive in. And if you're with us on YouTube, we'd really appreciate it if you could like this deep dive, maybe share it, and definitely subscribe, join the community.
You can also find us on X, Instagram, and Threads for more updates, maybe some behind-the-scenes stuff.
Today, though, we're tackling a really tough and, frankly, critical subject, the Gaza War. Casualties, crisis, and conflict. It demands careful thought.
It absolutely does. It's incredibly complex with no easy answers at all. So to try and give a comprehensive view, we've pulled together quite a few significant sources.
Okay, what are we looking at?
We've got the Wikipedia entries, the detailed ones, on both casualties of the Gaza War and the broader Gaza War. Then there are some insightful BBC articles.
Yes, the maps one.
That's one, Gaza Strip in Maps, how 15 months of war have drastically changed life. And also their piece explaining the history of the conflict.
Right.
We're also looking at findings from an Integrated Food Security Phase Classification Report. That's the IPC, the global standard for checking food insecurity. It details the acute situation in Gaza.
Sounds serious.
It is. And related to that, a press release from the World Health Organization, the WHO, on the same issue, plus a situation report from UNRWA.
Okay, quite a range of sources there.
Yeah.
So our mission for this deep dive.
Essentially, to synthesize all this information, we want to pull out the most critical insights about the casualties, the huge humanitarian crisis, and the really deep-rooted conflict dynamics driving it all.
Trying to offer some clarity, some context for you, our listener, to better understand this ongoing situation. Okay, let's start with the casualties. It's a sobering place to begin.
It is. And establishing reliable casualty figures in any war zone is just notoriously difficult. BBC Verify actually put in a lot of effort to understand the IDF's methodology, how they count militant deaths. Unfortunately, their repeated questions went unanswered. That lack of transparency, it really raises questions, doesn't it, about verifying the information?
It absolutely does. So without that official clarity, what did BBC Verify do?
Well, they did their own analysis. They monitored the IDF's official Telegram channel.
Okay.
And through that, they documented 714 reported militant deaths. This was as of February 29th. But, and this is a big caveat, in 247 of those announcements, the language used was really vague. Things like several or dozens, even hundreds.
So you can't get a precise number from that.
Exactly. It makes a specific tally impossible based just on those statements.
So a big chunk of the IDF's own public reporting isn't specific enough for verification. What about visual evidence? Videos, things like that?
Also scarce. BBC Verify went through 280 videos the IDF posted on YouTube showing operations in Gaza.
That's a lot of footage.
It is. And in all of that, only a single video actually showed the bodies of deceased Palestinian militants.
Just one?
Just one. So that limited visual evidence makes independent verification even harder. This whole opacity around the numbers, it makes it tough to grasp the true human cost,
Yeah.
And it can undermine trust.
Yeah, it definitely fuels polarization. And it's crucial to remember this isn't just about Palestinian casualties. The attacks on October 7th involved many non-Palestinian civilians, too.
Absolutely. The killing of Shani Luke, the German-Israeli woman at the music festival, that was particularly shocking, especially with that awful video circulating.
Horrific.
And she wasn't the only one. Other German citizens kidnapped, at least 17 British citizens killed or still missing, some from the festival, too.
It just reached so many different nationalities.
They really did. We know 18 Ukrainians were killed, a Cambodian student, a Chilean woman confirmed killed by Hamas, and France also suffered heavy losses. 13 killed, 17 missing, including kids.
Such personal tragedies, just underlining the reach of that initial violence. The Wikipedia source also lists some names of Palestinian civilians killed.
Yes, and while we can't name everyone, it's so important to acknowledge the individual lives behind the statistics.
Definitely.
Names like Tawfiq Abdel-Jabbar, Hiba Abu Nada, Rafat Al-Arir, Little Hind Rajab, and so many others. Each one a life cut short, a family devastated. It's a stark reminder.
It really is. And this loss of life, it connects directly to the broader humanitarian situation, doesn't it? Families left behind, communities struggling. The physical destruction alone is immense.
Staggering is the word. Experts looking at satellite images, they estimate almost 60% of all buildings in Gaza are damaged or destroyed. This is after 15 months. Gaza City hit the hardest.
60%. And the UN's numbers.
Even more severe, actually. They suggest over 90% of housing units damaged. That includes about 160,000 totally destroyed and another 276,000 with severe or partial damage.
Just unbelievable destruction. And it's not just buildings, right? The land itself.
Absolutely. What used to be farmland, greenhouses, vital stuff, it's been bulldozed, turned into rubble and sand by heavy machinery during clearing operations.
Which has huge long-term consequences for food production, I imagine.
Exactly, for Gaza's ability to sustain itself. And on top of this destruction, you have this massive repeated displacement. People forced to flee, not just once, but multiple times as the fighting moved.
Okay, let's talk about aid. Humanitarian aid delivery seems like a really contentious point, with completely different stories coming out.
It really is. UN officials consistently point fingers at Israeli restrictions on aid entry, the fighting itself, and a breakdown of law and order inside Gaza. Those are the main hurdles they see.
But Israel sees it differently.
Completely. Israel insists there are no limits on the amount of aid allowed in. They blame UN agencies for being inefficient with distribution. And they also accuse Hamas of stealing aid.
Which Hamas denies.
So you have these conflicting narratives.
So with both sides blaming the other, what does that really tell us? Does it suggest the current systems just aren't working? What needs to change for aid to actually reach people?
That's the critical question, isn't it? Regardless of who's technically right or wrong in that argument, the result on the ground for civilians is devastating. They're not getting what they need.
And the economic impact. I saw some numbers that were just mind-blowing.
Utterly catastrophic.
Yeah.
The World Bank reported an 86% contraction in Gaza's economy just in the first quarter of 2024. They called it the largest economic contraction on record.
86%.
Yeah. And maybe even more telling, nearly everyone, almost 100% of the population is now living in poverty. That's up from 64% before this war.
Wow.
And at the same time, basic supplies. The cost has just skyrocketed, up by almost 250%.
So people have no money and everything costs way more.
Precisely. And UNCTAD, that's the UN's trade and development body, they looked at the long-term picture. It's incredibly bleak.
What are their projections?
They estimate the damage at $18.5 billion. That's about 7 times Gaza's entire GDP in 2022.
7 times.
And they project that even if fighting stopped completely, it could take, get this, 350 years to rebuild Gaza's economy to where it was pre-war.
350 years.
Yes. And that's if the economic and movement restrictions that have been in place since 2007 are actually lifted.
That number, almost impossible to process. What does that even mean for the future for the people there?
It's hard to fathom. And then there's the environmental side effect of all this destruction, the debris.
Right, all those collapsed buildings. How much are we talking about?
UNP, the UN Environment Program, estimates over 50 million tons of debris, just mountains of rubble.
50 million tons? How long does it take to clear something like that?
They reckon the clearing process alone could take 21 years. And that's not even counting the danger from unexploded bombs and shells mixed in with it all.
So years just to clear the rubble, posing health risks the whole time. It's another major block to any kind of recovery.
Definitely. And layered on top of all this physical destruction is the crisis in food security and health. The reports are deeply, deeply worrying.
What are they saying?
The IPC analysis, the food security one, clearly shows severe acute food insecurity right across Gaza. The WHO warnings are even more stark. They're saying people are already starving, getting incredibly sick, and dying, even before any official famine is declared.
So famine conditions, essentially, even without the label yet.
Yes. They describe this awful cycle. Malnutrition weakens people, makes them vulnerable to diseases like diarrhea, pneumonia, which then makes the malnutrition worse.
A vicious cycle.
Exactly. And it hits young children with severe acute malnutrition hardest. They need urgent treatment just to survive.
And what about pregnant women, mothers, babies?
It's critical for them, too. Malnourished mothers often can't produce enough nutritious breast milk, which puts their babies at severe risk. And the long-term impact of this widespread malnutrition.
You mean beyond just immediate survival?
Yeah. Stunted growth, impaired brain development, chronic health problems later in life. It could genuinely affect an entire generation of Palestinians in Gaza.
That's terrifying to think about. Has the WHO commented on the aid distribution points Israel proposed?
They have. They assess them as grossly insufficient to meet the overwhelming need. They're just repeating their call for consistent, unimpeded humanitarian access based purely on need. UNRWA's reports echo this constantly. It's an ongoing catastrophe.
It sounds like it. To really understand how we got here to this point of crisis and these casualty levels, we probably need to touch on the history, right? It's long and incredibly complicated.
It is. The roots go way back. After World War I, Britain took control of Palestine. Back then, it was mostly Arab, but with a significant Jewish minority.
And tensions started rising pretty early.
Yeah, especially after the UK sort of agreed in principle to establishing a national home for Jewish people in Palestine. That was the Balfour Declaration.
Which, understandably, caused concern for the existing population.
Exactly. Jewish people obviously have deep historical ties to the land, but Palestinian Arabs also had long-standing roots and strongly opposed the declaration. The British themselves said the rights of the existing population needed protecting.
But Jewish immigration increased
Significantly between the 1920s and 40s, partly people fleeing persecution in Europe, and then the Holocaust created this urgent, undeniable need for a safe haven. By 1947, the Jewish population was over 30%.
And that led to the UN getting involved.
Right. Violence was increasing, British rule was ending. So in 1947, the UN proposed a partition plan.
Okay, for listeners maybe less familiar, what was the basic idea behind that plan? How did they propose dividing the land? And what were the main issues?
The UN plan suggested splitting Palestine into separate Arab and Jewish states. Jerusalem was to be under international control. The division was roughly based on demographics at the time, although the Jewish state got a larger land share despite having a smaller population then.
How was it received?
Arab nations rejected it flat out. They argued it was unfair, ignored the rights of the Arab majority. Britain abstained from the vote and basically washed its hands of it, leaving on May 14, 1948.
And that's when Israel declared independence.
Just hours before the British mandate ended, yeah. Jewish leaders declared the State of Israel. The very next day, 5 neighboring Arab armies attacked.
The 1948 Arab-Israeli War.
Or Israel's War of Independence, as they call it.
Yeah.
By the time armistices were signed in 1949, Israel controlled more territory than the partition plan suggested. Egypt ended up controlling Gaza, Jordan got the West Bank and East Jerusalem, and Israel held West Jerusalem.
And this war had a massive impact on Palestinians.
Huge. Around 750,000 Palestinians either fled or were forced from their homes in what became Israel. They became refugees. This is the Nakba, the catastrophe in Arabic. Its legacy is still central today.
And many Jews also moved to Israel around that time.
Yes, in the following years, hundreds of thousands of Jews left or were expelled from Muslim countries across the Middle East and North Africa, and many came to Israel.
Then came the 1967 war, another major turning point.
Absolutely. In 1967, Israel occupied the Gaza Strip, the West Bank, and East Jerusalem. These areas, including East Jerusalem, are what most of the world calls the occupied Palestinian territories.
And Palestinians want these areas for a future state.
Yes, that's the core of their national aspiration, and it has broad international support.
But then there's the issue of Israeli settlements in those territories, still a major sticking point.
A critical one. There are about 150 settlements now in the West Bank and East Jerusalem, home to around 700,000 Jewish settlers. Palestinians see them as illegal under international law and want them removed for peace.
How does Israel view them?
Israel disputes their illegality, citing historical and security reasons. They see major settlement blocks as permanent and don't recognize a Palestinian right to an independent state there, often using biblical names for the West Bank. They even announced more settlement plans in 2022.
And Jerusalem itself is another deeply contested issue. Both sides claim it.
Right. Israel took West Jerusalem in 48, then occupied East Jerusalem in 67, later declaring the whole city its unified eternal capital. Palestinians claim East Jerusalem as the capital of their future state. Most of the world and many UN resolutions consider East Jerusalem occupied Palestinian territory.
Okay, so settlements, Jerusalem. What about Palestinian statehood itself and the refugee question?
Well, a big majority UN members, 143 out of 193, voted just this May 2024 to support Palestine's bid for full UN membership. But key players like the U.S. and some European countries don't recognize a Palestinian state yet. They say it has to be part of a final peace deal.
And Israel's position?
Israel strongly opposes an independent Palestinian state, viewing it as a security threat. As for refugees, there are about 5.9 million registered with the UN descendants of those displaced in 48-49.
And they claim a right to return.
Yes, Palestinians assert a right to return to their ancestral homes. Israel has always refused this and also criticizes UNRWA for allowing refugee status to pass down generations.
Which brings us to the two-state solution. It's meant to solve these issues, but it seems perpetually stalled.
That's the idea, yes. An independent Palestine in the West Bank and Gaza, capital in East Jerusalem, living peacefully alongside Israel. The Palestinian Authority officially backs this.
But Hamas doesn't.
Hamas fundamentally opposes Israel's existence, so rejects the two-state solution in principle. Although they have sometimes hinted they might accept an interim state on the 67 borders without recognizing Israel, but only if refugees get the right of return. Past efforts like the Oslo Accords in the 90s, well, they ultimately failed.
And even the name of the current conflict reflects these different perspectives, right?
Exactly. Many just call it the Gaza War. The Israeli government uses iron swords. Hamas and other militants call it Al-Aqsa Flood. The names themselves show the competing narratives.
We've also heard reports about a severe siege in northern Gaza recently. More restrictions, more displacement.
Yes, concerning reports about that. And the ceasefires we've seen, they've all been temporary. They break down with both sides accusing the other of violations and just fundamental disagreements on terms for lasting peace.
Looking ahead, have there been serious post-war plans discussed?
Various ideas have floated around. There was talk of a big Arab League reconstruction plan, reportedly $53 billion, but it was conditional on Hamas disarming and elections for a reformed Palestinian Authority.
Any other proposals?
There were more controversial reports, like one attributed to the Trump administration involving displacing Gaza's population and a U.S. takeover. That was strongly rejected by Arab governments.
Understandably. And the infrastructure damage we discussed earlier, that must impact everything, even communication.
Hugely. The bombardment has wrecked telecommunications networks. Severe communication blackouts happen, which is terrible for civilians trying to get information or call for help, and also for aid coordination.
The scale of destruction. I read comparisons to WWII bombings.
Yes, analysts have made those comparisons, saying the sheer scale, the intensity of destruction in some urban areas is unprecedented in many ways for modern conflicts, even surpassing some WWII levels in certain aspects.
How has the wider world reacted? It seems very divided.
It is. At the UN General Assembly, Saudi Arabia announced this global alliance pushing for a two-state solution, which has a lot of international backing. But many countries in the Islamic world across the global south have strongly condemned Israel's actions and its allies' policies.
Citing double standards.
Often, yes. Comparing the response to Gaza with, say, the invasion of Ukraine, and perceiving a difference in applying international human rights norms, some countries, like Bolivia, even cut diplomatic ties with Israel. Others recalled ambassadors.
And this has probably impacted other diplomatic efforts in the region, like Israel-Saudi normalization.
Absolutely. The conflict has significantly complicated, maybe even derailed, those normalization talks for the foreseeable future.
So, pulling this all together, this deep dive has really highlighted the tragic connections between the loss of life, the deepening humanitarian crisis, and this incredibly complex, long-running historical and political conflict.
Definitely. The challenges facing people in Gaza are just immense, and the path to any kind of just lasting resolution seems incredibly difficult, full of massive obstacles.
It really does. The sheer scale of destruction we've talked about, it raises such profound questions, doesn't it? About the long-term future there, about the ethical duties of the international community.
It really does. What international actors do or don't do will be critical in either prolonging this or hopefully helping find a way to resolve it.
Well, as we wrap up this exploration into the Gaza War, we really hope this deep dive has given you, our listener, a clearer, perhaps more nuanced understanding of these interconnected issues, the casualties, the crisis, the conflict itself.
We hope it's been valuable.
If you did find this analysis insightful, please do support the All Sorts podcast. You know the drill, like this deep dive. Share it with others who might find it useful, and subscribe to our YouTube channel. You can join our community and explore all our past deep dives there, too.
And don't forget to follow the All Sorts podcast on X, Instagram, and Threads for the latest updates and maybe a peek behind the curtain.
Your engagement truly helps us keep bringing these important, often difficult conversations and diverse perspectives to you. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.